Thank you very much. Well, they're getting a film ready to start. Let me just thank both Chip and Sally and also Janice for working so hard to help bring this group together to be able to address what we think is a really critical component of our discussions here today on climate change and the future of civilization. Having said that, I want to say that being at a renewable energy conference is wonderful for us from a regenerative agricultural discussion point to be at, because together we can fix this. Alone, each not working together, we actually can't fix the climate question. So with that, are we ready with the film? Please.
I really did not know how the soil worked. It's alive.
All of our soils that are under chemical conventional agriculture are almost completely devoid of microorganisms.
These chemicals, which were considered way too dangerous to use before, are now being used at rates that would have been inconceivable 20 years ago.
Wherever there's large-scale agricultural production, you see way too much bare ground.
About 2/3 of the world is turning to desert.
We are literally killing ourselves with the food production system we have today.
Time is running short. We need to do something now.
Through agriculture, we have unleashed carbon from the land, and it's now up in the atmosphere. It's now part of that legacy load of carbon dioxide. And many people are coming to this discussion about soil health because it can bring that carbon back down and put it in the ground.
The only goal for humanity is drawdown, a year-to-year reduction in carbon in the upper atmosphere. Once you achieve drawdown, within 20 years, you have cooling.
There could be a permanent agriculture that regenerated resources.
The principles of soil health are universal. This is not rocket science.
If you look over here, we have my neighbor's land that has been chemical fallowed. Then you look over at our paddocks. There you have soil. Over on this side, you have dirt.
By definition, you can't have delicious food without something going very, very right in environmental stewardship and soil health.
Healthy soils lead to a healthy plant, healthy animal, healthy human, healthy water, healthy climate. It's not a campaign, it's a movement.
Which model do you want your food to be produced from? The answer is pretty simple to me.
Our health and the health of our planet are connected. We are all on the spaceship together.
We'll have a comment about this film later by John Roulac, who is one of our panelists. And I want to welcome the panel here today of committed people who have come and have been passionate about how we get carbon back into the soil from where it was taken. And Alison Burchell on the end, just to introduce her now, who will speak a little bit later. You've heard a little bit about here as one of the heroes locally on 100% renewable energies for her community. She was an environmentalist, a kind of river runner in Colorado, but she was founder and senior geologist for NTS, the Collaborative, and a former USGS geologist. She's also, as we said, the co-founder of Clean Energy Action, which did that successful work here in this community and talks around the country in trying to help with that. Next to her is John Roulac, and John Roulac has been deeply committed to regenerative agriculture for years. He has started a company, Nutiva, many of you know of this company, deeply committed to organic, clean, healthy food, and he's been working, of course, with the supply chain in a regenerative way. He's the author of 4 books and also has started 5 nonprofits, including GMO Inside. And next to me is Daniela Howell, who has had 25 years in regenerative agriculture work in really stopping the spread of deserts and restoring grazing lands around the world. She has a background from the standpoint of coming from, as a co-founder most recently as the Savory Institute, but has worked with the UN and also the 4 per 1,000 program, which we should all be aware of, as the French government had initiated this, let's move our parts per thousand of carbon up in soils, and how it's going to help both in the fertility but also in climate change. And then we have a panelist who isn't physically present here with us today, but from Los Angeles will be joining us on Skype, and we've asked our wonderful technical panel to do very complex things today and do somersaults while they're doing it at the same time. And that's Larry Coppold, who is on screen with us now. He was the White House, been on President Obama's White House panel on social innovation. But why he's with us today is he's president and co-founder of the Carbon Underground. He has 25 years of experience in advertising and worked with some of the biggest companies in this country. And with that, I want to start with my slides, if I may, to kind of frame a little bit, thank you, of what we are looking at from the standpoint of soil carbon, climate, and as potential, what the potential is to move us to actually solving the problem. To begin with, let me just say, next slide if we could, that we are in trouble even if we stop our emissions. And we know that the planet will continue to warm. Now, when we look at the history of that, is that okay? And this is where I have a little difficulty with 350.org, 350 conversations, let's keep us in that level. We have no historical proof that will work. And coming out of working in Africa for 4 years with Howard Buffett, I have seen the results of where the climatologists, the climate scientists told us climate change would impact first. There are now 4 current famines taking place there due to droughts. And this is where the pain is showing itself. So with no evidence that we can live there, it really begs us to ask the question, why are we having that conversation? And shouldn't we be moving back to below 300? And the good news is it's doable. The question is, will we choose to do it? Next slide. Adam Sachs, I appreciate you and your presentation to really challenging us on that question. Here's something that's happening at the same time frame. While climate change is going to put us at risk for food production globally, we only have 60 harvests left because we're degrading and eroding our soils, this carbon sink, at a very fast pace. So for the youth in this audience, know that there are 2 cataclysms aligning themselves towards future for civilization. And we need to be rebuilding and bringing the carbon back to the soil. So it was rather interesting to hear the discussion today by Jeffrey Sachs about we need to decarbonize, because within the renewable energy, that's a term that's used a lot. We in agriculture have been decarbonizing for 10,000 years, and it wasn't so good in that case. So we need to recarbonize. So what a great partnership. We need to decarbonize our emissions, but recarbonize our soils and build them back to feed the world, but also mitigate climate change. Next slide, please. Oh, I have you're going to pass that to me and do my own work. All right. I want to come here and connect with you a little bit too, Samantha, if you're still in the room, because you were bold enough to talk about agriculture and its impact on the oceans. And there's a tie here with respect to the heavy high input consciousness of artificial fertilizers. And we're not talking about how much it degrades soils, and at least we're recognizing how it causes eutrophication and huge dead zones. And so a regenerative approach steps outside of this old paradigm while building the systems with biological. Next, please, as I need to quickly here. Oh, I'm next. I'm sorry. So, you know, Wesley Clark, I just wanted to make one mention of Wesley Clark's point, and that was, I'm not knowing how to operate this. I don't even see a button on it. The green, thank you. What happens when we put carbon back in soil? We start to push back against droughts. We start to hold more water. We start to reduce floods, which I don't have time to go into. Let me quickly use this slide. Gabe Brown was in the end of this film. He was the farmer talking about dirt versus soil. What happens is he learned over time, not as an organic thinker, but simply knowing he was going broke, and he went to no-till. Then he went to cover crops. Then he increased those cover crop diversity, and then carbon took off. And then he added livestock. And whereas I'm pretty much a vegetarian, one of the things we need to realize, how does biology and earth work? It works how evolution worked. And that was that the grasses needed the fungi to feed them, And the grasses needed the ruminants to be able to stimulate and grow and leave the re-inoculation of biology that comes from that rumen. And so it's a system that then, look at what happened to the carbon. At a rate of 22 tons per hectare per year. And this is how, when we take work like David Johnson that Adam Sachs had talked about, this is where we start to get yield increases with actually no outside inputs, just changing the biology. So in 2008, when I started talking about soil carbon and we could fix the climate problem, the last two bars we didn't know about. And the second to last bar is talking about carbon sequestration at the rate of 8 tons per hectare per year out of Georgia, research on grazing, planned grazing on grasses, and the far right hand is David Johnson's work out of New Mexico State talking about inoculation, and that's it. The nitrogen's provided, the phosphorus is provided, all by the biology, and carbon is sequestered at a magnitude higher than what I was talking about in 2008. The future could look bright. With that, I want to relinquish my time and remind us we could get back down to pre-industrial levels and let some of these speakers begin to emphasize the work that they're doing and the knowledge that they can bring to this system. Daniela, if you would please talk to us a little bit about what has already been introduced to this audience, is about what can happen when we start to use our ruminants in a different manner.
Yes, thank you. And I have a few slides. Will I have access to them while we're trying to get these? If
Yes,
not, I can
yes,
go without it.
yes, you will.
Yes,
But could you begin? Yeah, please, please.
Great. Thank you again, Daniela Howell with the Savory Institute. I'm honored to be here. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, everybody, for giving us a voice. I am the CEO of the Savory Institute. The Savory Institute works, has tapped onto the work of Alan Savory for over 50 years now, and it's facilitating the large-scale restoration of the grasslands of the world through holistic management. Going back to what Tim was saying, what we're trying to do is harness the power of photosynthesis, just a parallel with the energy industry. We need to make agriculture solar. We need to make agriculture biological. Unfortunately, today, chemical and mechanical processes are dominating agriculture. We need to go back, make it solar, for which farmers and ranchers need to grow more grass that can photosynthesize, grow it well, so it starts very active for as long as possible throughout the year. That way, that infinite source of solar energy is turned into biochemical energy, carbohydrates, that fits the whole web of life, and that is very important for not only food and the nutrient-rich density in our food, but also for the ability of these microbiology in the soil to fix and sequester permanent carbon in permanent stable forms. You know Alan Savory, he talked about, in his famous TED Talk, about how to fight desertification and reverse climate change. And that, I don't know if it was that, or that the climate change situation was, just is becoming more obvious to everybody, but that has given a little bit of more attention to both grasslands and livestock as ways of using these amazing landscapes as carbon sinks. Grasslands have been very neglected in the political, climate, and ag agendas, but they are very important. They are very important because they are very vast. It's a third of the land surface are grasslands. We think of agriculture more as croplands, but croplands are at 20%. It needs to happen because that's where the grasslands were, but in the humid areas, the more productive areas. But we have a lot of those. It appeared in that video that you showed at the beginning, Tim. All these brown areas in the world, that 2/3 of the world are really between the deserts and the grasslands. Some of them prior grasslands, the deserts prior grasslands, have the capacity to regenerate through management. And let me tell you a little bit about how we do that with holistic management. We went back and observed how these grasslands evolved. They evolved in the presence of large herds of herbivores. What the herbivore does is, in these where humidity is very erratic, what it does is during the dry periods, the moisture microbes in the gut of these animals will complete the decay mechanism back of all that green material back to the ground. If that doesn't happen, what happens is these plants begin oxidizing, so chemical processes take over rather than biological processes, and plants start dying. That happened when we domesticated livestock production. So the same way we domesticated some grains, we did the same with animals. Then we disrupted that beautiful nature-intelligent way in which the herbivores interacted with the grasslands, always migrating, always salivating, stomping, grazing, and creating the conditions for the soil to then receive the rain in the following season. Well, when we became more sedentary, that got disrupted, and as a result, we started this process of desertification for the past many, many years that has created bare ground, simplification, loss of biological diversity. So now what we're trying to do is mimic what those wild herbivores have done with domestic animals. Domestic animals have the potential, have the power, if properly managed, to create the same outcomes that the cousins back then used to. So we have seen tremendous amount of results in many different types of environments. This is a very, what we call brittle. So there's a dry period in which the animal is the one that is bringing back this plant material into the soil. But see the difference, this happened in 9 years of holistic plant grazing. And this is in less productive environments in which we also have this ability to use the animal to kickstart that biological cycle of decay in the ground and begin feeding the soil and allowing for establishment of plants and such. There's some data associated, and I was asked to put some of the data, but Tim has presented it, so I won't stay too long. But we have seen when we bring holistic plant grazing, which is very strategic, systems approach planning process and monitoring process by which we took into account all the complexity of any ecological, social, political environment and tried to plan the movement of those animals not only to respect the needed recovery and conditions of the land and the plants in them, but also any other consideration that we may have, like wildlife habitat or water restrictions or specific poisonous plants that may be very dangerous for livestock at some times of the year. So all this planning allows us to bring complexity into the mix. It's not just moving the animals around, but bringing some of that nature's intelligence that we lost when we began doing agriculture, simplifying things. And now let's look back at the high complexity and manage for that complexity. So it's a very strategic planning process for which we have seen up to 8 tons of metric tons of carbon a year per hectare that can be sequestered. And even without going that far, if we stay in 2 to 3, that is doable. In most of these environments, when you see the difference between those two sides of the picture that I showed, there's tremendous opportunities to sequester a large amount of carbon. Jason Roundtree, in his last paper, mentioned 25% in the US that we can put under these more regenerative practices. We could take care of all the carbon footprint of agriculture in the United States. So it's a matter of scaling it, and it's a matter of accelerating it. So the Savory Institute is working to scale it. The scale-up strategy is to partner with people around the world in what we call hubs. It's our hub strategy to influence 1 billion, or have the infrastructure needed to influence 1 billion hectares of land by 2025. We have 5 billion hectares of grasslands. And the idea is this is not just a practice. These practices are very context specific. So this is planning. This is understanding your own context. So we believe that the only way we're going to do it fast is working with people that live and breathe the context in which they are influencing. So we have established, so far, 30 partnerships around the world, 30 hubs, 7 of which are in the United States. We equip them with the knowledge and the tools for them to go and reach out to farmers and ranchers and give them the tools they need to begin managing their livestock as nature would have intended. And so far, we have influenced over 8 million by now hectares of land and over 4,000 producers. So the last piece, and it's what we're working really hard now, is how we accelerate the uptake by the farmer and the rancher when all the policies and all the marketing influences and incentives are really sort of favoring the status quo. So we are trying to bring together with a few market partners that are very committed to see this happening, trying to bring the consumer back to the equation, bring the market forces that we need with the land-to-market partner in which we will facilitate these regenerative producers meeting the end user and creating additional incentives for them to put the signals out there that this is what we want. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. So Daniela has reminded us about the whole systems as very important in this biological piece.
Some of you who were here last year might remember the first couple of slides. I am a geologist. Till 2007, I was going around the world studying volcanoes and trying to understand when volcanoes were going to erupt and the climate impacts of volcanoes, and I thought that was the most important thing I could be doing. And when I moved to Colorado, I got deployed by the USGS to start taking a look at mineland reclamation issues, and it changed my life, changed my world, it changed my life. As my colleagues have said, it's one of the most important things we can do for climate change. The three slides on the far right here are the three areas that got me going on the reclamation issue, the soil reclamation issue and the carbon reclamation issue. The top slide is an area that reclamation agents, both public and private, have been trying to reclaim the soil for about 100 years. The bottom one is an area that had reclaimed naturally over a period of a little over 50 years. And the middle slide is a slide where there was a fire that went through and a bunch of mine shacks were burned down, and there was a bunch of charcoal, literally biochar, that was left on the ground. So the carbon was added to the soil at that time. And in about 8 years, it's grown to 2% weight percent carbon in the soil all by itself. So I started going, what does nature know that we don't? What are we missing? What's working and what's not working here? And I'm just going to take you through these really quickly. We did a study of the Rocky Mountain Cordillera, and I'm not going to go through the analysis in detail. These slides are here just to show you that the data, the information, the analysis, the chemistry is available to anyone who wants it. I'm happy to take you through it. I was so glad that 10 for Change and everybody, all the millennials, that you kept asking for more data. Keep asking. We've got lots of data for you to take a look at and help you with your municipal reclamation programs, your agricultural reclamation programs, your mining reclamation programs, and I'll tell you about some more. This is a slide, and the three things I want to bring your attention to is in these soils that are reclaimed naturally. Look at the Hg, that's the mercury. In the last 20 years, the mercury in our soils has gone up really high, and we all know what that is. That's the coal-fired power plants mostly. I want you to take a look at right below the mercury, the soil enzyme analysis. When you've got healthy soils, the enzyme activity is off the charts. And remember, these are in areas that reclaimed naturally. There wasn't any nitrate amendments or anything. The animals run wild, whatever. And And you look at the radiocarbon dates, and that was really interesting because one of the factors that was really important in naturally reclaimed areas, be it grasslands or forests, but certainly we saw it much more frequently in forested areas, is there were these, about every 100 years, there were these black horizons. And at the time I knew nothing about, well, Sally knows this, we've talked about this a lot, I knew nothing about biochar. So I went into the lab and started doing electron microscopy studies, and I saw there's this thing that was like, almost like graphene. I'm like, this is carbon. Well, in fact, that's what it was, and it was forest fires and grassland fires, it was natural chars. And there's one other thing here, it's a complicated slide. I just want to bring your attention to the DOC. For all of you that are concerned about what's happening in the oceans, the dissolved carbon that is leaving our disturbed lands and being redeposited in the oceans is significant. So healthy soils do not contribute dissolved oxygen to our water systems, and they do not, therefore, contribute to carbonation of the oceans. So there's another reason for another group to be concerned about this. It's not clicking. It's not going. Oh, it did. Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay. For those of you that know Colorado and have hiked around Colorado, this is Engineer Pass. This is a huge peak in Colorado. There isn't a blade of grass growing anywhere on Engineer Pass except where there was carbon added to the soil by one of those mine shack burns that we had seen. So there's another, oops, I didn't want to do that. Let's go back. And so let's talk about, that was kind of a long introduction to the biochar. And so let's talk about biochar. We've seen that it's really, in the field, we've seen that it's really, really important to the health of the soil and to the natural reclamation of the soil. But why? What makes it so special? Mostly it's the structure of the biochar. It's very porous, and in those pores, they act like condominiums for microbes. It holds water. The water retention is in soils, horizons that have biochar is about 5 to 1. And what's really nice in soils that have the organic components, be it leaf litter organic components, the animals that graze on the plains, what happens is the microbes from those organic components, when there's a biochar horizon not too deep, have a home to hide out in during periods of high stress. We've done a lot of analysis on a lot of biochars now. One of the things I want to draw your attention to is arsenic, aluminum, barium, and we've just gotten some recent analysis on uranium and mercury. Biochar, because of the electronegativity capacity, has a very high retention for these elements. So it's a natural water purification system. Other nutrients that biochar has an affinity to are the phosphates and nitrates, and we have all seen with climate change, the growing algae components in the lakes and the need to start cleaning up the lakes, and I'll show you some pictures with that. There's a lot of talk on commercial biochar operations, and there's a lot of good operators out there. The one thing I would say is if you're concerned about making energy, having an energy byproduct from your biochar units, then fast pyrolysis is fine. But if you really want that nice condominium clean biochar, then you want a slow biochar process, and we can talk more about this offline. But I want those of you who are looking at investing in biochar or adding biochar to your soils to know that probably for reclamation purposes, the slow biochar process is more advantageous. And here's just some examples. These are examples of, anybody of you know Ron Lahl or Johannes Lehmann. These are some experiments that they've run in South America. Here's some examples of lake cleanups by an outfit using high-quality slow pyrolysis biochar about how you can clean up the lakes very quickly. Certainly, there's no loss of supply. And I just want to end with a couple examples that where we've actually applied the NTS techniques, the biochar, addition of compost. This is a project in Finland. It used to be a Superfund mining site. It's been completely reclaimed, and it's a famous golf course now. Here's a project that we're going to be working on fairly soon down in Guatemala, where we're going to be looking at using the biochar to soak up the mercury and then start reclaiming the soils. Guatemala actually has a pretty good commitment as a neighbor south of the border to start shutting down the coal-fired power plants, and they've contacted us to take the next step and start reclaiming the soils. And just one more thing I want to draw your attention to is the work of UCAR and NCAR. They are so supportive of regenerative ag and the whole soil reclamation industry that they are creating an amazing program for monitoring extreme events, and they're going to add to their amazing program a way to start incorporating soil moisture monitors that are going to link up to their satellites, and we're going to have 6-minute recovery information. So long-term forecasting, 5-year, 10-year, 15-year forecasting on weather events is going to be very important. Droughts, floods, they can even now, they've backcasted, and they can actually predict where a hurricane's path. So the importance to the insurance industry, reinsurance industry is going to be really important. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alison. We really appreciate that background. Larry.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. I really apologize for not being able to be there. My wife just had surgery the day before yesterday, so apologize for not being there, for not having much better looking slides on the screen. So about a month ago, Tim and Daniela had a small conference in France where Christiana Figueres, who put together the whole COP21 agreement, told us all to swallow the alarm clock. She said we have 3 years to deal with climate before some of the systems break. 3 years. So that's sort of a setup as to why the carbon underground exists, because everything that we're working on is designed to leverage whatever we can to accelerate the extension of that runway. To go from 3 years to 5 years and get us to the 50-year runway we need to get to a carbon-neutral society that experts say we need. So we were founded 4 years ago by 2 businessmen, which is very relevant to our model. Both of us are very passionate and engaged environmentalists.
Larry, can you hear me? Forgive me for interrupting. We are not getting really good sound through right now. I'm going to repeat a couple of things you said, and then I'm not sure whether this is going to have a chance to improve. But one of the things that Larry had said is that Daniela and Larry and I were in Paris recently, and we were told very clearly that we have 3 years really in this whole climate situation to turn this around and to begin this process. And Larry has talked about beginning that modeling and what that looks like. Larry, please try, if you could, in a few words, see if we can hear you better.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the carbon underground. I apologize, I'm getting myself about 8 times. We were founded by 2 business guys. Myself, I worked in the advertising world for many years and ran the advertising for Coca-Cola and McDonald's and Honda, some of the companies we're now working with on this project. Tom Newmark, my co-founder, was the CEO of New Chapter, one of the big supplement and vitamin companies sold to P&G a couple of years ago. And we were really founded on 2 realities. One is that there is no solution to climate change that does not include carbon drawdown, and that there's no mechanism to do it and get us to the scale in the time frame we have other than restoring our soil. And regenerative agriculture is the best way to get there. We're built on hope for 3 reasons. No movement in human history has happened without it. Nature has got this. Nature will do this if we get out of the way. And we can play to the biggest motivators that we have here, which is special interest and personal interest. So let's talk about who has the power to really impact this. It's business, government, and the public. We appeal directly to those special interests. For business, that means improved supply chains, increasing margins, an easier path to compliance and carbon footprint commitments. It means improved brand value. Imagine a company saying to their customers that they're actually helping reverse climate change. For government, it means things like greater food security. Tim talked about the fact that we're running out of topsoil. We have 60 harvests left. It means restoring and protecting fresh water supplies. It means diminishing of conflicts around the world, improving health and reducing healthcare costs. Now, notice all of these things I just went through, I did without ever talking about climate change, and that's why we have hope. So what are we doing to leverage that dynamic at Carbon Underground? We're educating hundreds of companies around the world. We're working with dozens of them. I mentioned some, but a lot of Fortune 50 companies, a lot of natural products companies on strategy, supply and demand creation for regeneratively grown ingredients. We're working on supply chain transformation. But we realized very early on that there is no standardized definition for regenerative agriculture. So with Tim LaSalle and California State University, we co-created one. It's a living definition, but we launched it with about 150 signatories, including John's company, Daniela's, and interestingly enough, companies owned by Unilever, Procter & Gamble, and General Mills. So the big boys are getting into this, and that's critically important. From a government standpoint, we work with local governments. We did a symposium for the state of Maryland, for example, that resulted in a Healthy Soils initiative where they're actually taking money and putting it toward agricultural products that are drawing down carbon, but they're doing it to take care of the biggest industry in the state of Maryland, which is agriculture. We work with the USDA and the NRCS, helping to get the word out and work with farmers in the US. And we work internationally. You heard about the French program, the 4 for 1,000. They now have close to 50 countries that have joined onto this. And so we're helping them both with communications and education to some of those countries. We work with the UN climate team as well as the FAO, and we work with organizations on communications like the Vatican. Hopefully you're going to see a video in a second of something that we produced for them when the Pope spoke to Congress about climate change and spoke at the national hall. So we did a video that's been running pretty much ever since that.
Larry, we're running real short of time.
I'm just
Great.
That our goal is real simple. We're trying to achieve the tipping points that are going to extend that runway and rebalance the carbon system, the whole carbon levels, so that we can live in a carbon neutral way. NOAA and Stephen Chu, our ex-Secretary of Energy, say we have about 1,000 years after the cessation of all emissions until the climate starts to heal. We think we can do that in 25 to 50. If we draw it down at the scale, no, we can't. So thank you. Sorry.
Larry, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. With that, John?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Larry, for coming in through Skype. I wanted to mention a little about that film. 3 years ago, I started focusing on regenerative agriculture, and I thought I almost lost my mind. I said, how is it, one of my mentors had done a presentation, how is it that the organic food industry, which is contributing to a better environment, healthier food system, is not talking about the role of soils in carbon sequestration and climate change. And so I decided that we needed to really educate people about the role of soils. And so I came up with this idea to do a film. I met the filmmakers Josh and Rebecca, and that was 3 years ago. through Nutiva, we contributed $30,000 first money into the film. And we're now on track to be at Sundance in 2018 as our goal. We haven't been accepted, but and it's really coming along. And for people who are interested in supporting the film, whatever, please let me know. So we're looking to finish it up. We're pretty close to do that. And I also just want to say I really enjoy this conference. First time I've been here. I really want to thank Sally and Chip for doing a great event. I really feel a community. I've met some really fascinating people. So really great job. Yeah, for sure.
One of the things that, John, you have brought to our discussions always is how the soils and the oceans are connected. And here's your slide.
Right, yeah. So in 1999, I made 500 hemp bars, sold them in my trunk up and down California. Since then, we've been 7 years in a row Inc. magazine, fastest growing companies. Been very fortunate to be successful. And our products are now in 20,000 stores around the world. We specialize in thank you, in coconut, hemp, chia, and red palm. And essentially what those four have in common is they're all foods that have been used traditionally for thousands of years, but that have been either forgotten or demonized. Recently, there's been a big attack on coconut. And the ironic thing is the countries that eat the most coconut have the lowest level of heart disease in the world. So, but you wouldn't hear that when you read the articles. There's a lot of misinformation in the media, unfortunately. And one of the things about Nutiva is we donate 1% of our sales, similar to Patagonia. We've donated over $4 million as a company to sustainable agriculture. Some of the projects, for instance, we're putting a fruit tree orchard at every public school in the city of Richmond, California, which is a food desert. And we've also donated 100,000 coconut seedlings to our farmers in the Philippines to help improve their economic and their farm systems. Thanks. And when I was 21 years old, they dumped an unidentified truck driver dumped nuclear waste 9 miles from my house in the Altadena-Pasadena area in Southern California. And that one issue, one thing that happened to me really was like an important thing in my life. And so since then, I became an environmental activist. I was like, how do they dump nuclear waste in an unidentified truck driver? Nothing happens to them, right? And so I've spent a lot of my time studying natural systems and through permaculture and organic farming. And I met a lot of interesting people. If you're looking at this book here, how many people have the copy of this Paul Hawkins, Drawdown? Really encourage you to get it. It's a great book. Nutiva is another project we supported, and Paul's a good friend. And they basically worked with researchers from around the world, over 100. And this is data-driven. This is not philosophy. This is data-driven. And what do you think the #1 sector to address climate change is? Agriculture. And if you talk to the climate groups today, what percentage of their focus is on agriculture? The climate moves, 350.org, Sierra Club. What percentage is it? 5. Yeah, it's and part of the challenge though, and I wrote a letter to all of them in EcoWatch and FedEx sent to them. The good thing is the Sierra Club actually responded, and they're working on adding a program around climate and soils. But part of the challenge is the funders are giving them the money and saying, go after coal. But CAFO is just as bad or worse, these CAFO facilities than coal. So we really got to change the food system. And solar and wind are really important, but we've got to, as you were mentioning, we've got to draw down the carbon. And so 15 out of the top 25 solutions in drawdown were land-based. And this is not rocket science. This is simple. We can do this. But how can we do it if we have the environmental movement not participating? Seriously. I mean, that really needs to change. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here. We're here. And we want it, and we just, it's a part of an education. Sometimes it takes a while to get some of this information going, but it's got, and I really encourage you to look at this book. So I'm going to talk about oceans and a little about one of the solutions in here called marine permaculture. So in the last year, I've really focused that we have an issue because all the carbon in the atmosphere, if we don't deal with the carbon that's the atmosphere, that's, to me, is the #1 environmental issue in the world today. It's not oil drilling, it's not coal-burning power plants. Those are important, but it's what's we're going to do with the carbon in the atmosphere that's falling into the oceans. Because you can name Elon Musk as energy czar for the entire world today, and he's in charge of all decisions, and if we follow his technology and pathways and all the different things everybody's working on solar, 90% of all species will be gone on this planet by 2050 unless we address soil. And we can do it, though. But we have to realize green energy is great, but we need to move into soils. And looking at oceans, they're warming at an increasing faster rate. And the phytoplankton, which provides, there was great presentations here on this, they provide up to 2/3 of our oxygen. And they're getting warmer, and the oceans, and also the carbon dioxide is leading to acidification. And they're absorbing all of this heat and the carbon dioxide. And since the Industrial Revolution, the pH has fallen by 0.1%. That may not seem very much, but it's actually a 30% increase in acidification. And many scientists, they don't want to necessarily say because they don't want to scare people, but within a few decades, there may not be one fish in the sea, not one whale, not one dolphin. So it's on our watch, and it's up to us to move forward and start addressing it. Now, this is something I do these like kind of culture jamming memes that I release into social media, and we put 140,000 comments on General Mills' Facebook on Cheerios, and we got them to go non-GMO. So right now, a lot of people are into climate change denial, and so we're going to be releasing this through social media that with people who support, they showed that statistic earlier about how many people who believe in, that climate change is, is a hoax. So I decided I want to name these individuals who are the ones who are promoting this and saying that they're part of the Dead Ocean Society. Because if we don't address climate change, we're going to have dead oceans. And ironically, a lot of people who don't believe in climate change love oceans. And when you can address them around the ocean issue, we can move them away from this bullshit, hoax issue that people like Trump and Pruitt are involved with.
John, if we could make one last comment.
Okay. So I'm just going to go through marine permaculture. This is a way to be able to grow large reforest the oceans through kelp and seaweeds. The Climate Foundation's working on this, and several of the scientists, Carl and Greg, that presented, I've talked to them, and I'm looking to get their experience on this project. Woods Hole Laboratory is working on this, so we can draw massive amounts of carbon through regrowing kelp and forests. And just like we reforest landscapes with trees, we can do the same, and there's a whole movement around this. It's very kind of cutting edge, but Woods Hole Research is doing this research, and the last thing I'll just say is the country of Australia has a $250,000 grant to put one of these platforms. They're submerged 70 feet below the surface of the ocean, and to grow these various types of seaweeds. And we can use those for animal feed, human feed, and also to restore the soils.
John, thank you very, very much. Let's thank the panel. And please feel free to connect with any of these presenters. Each one, as you know, has great passion for a very, very important issue for all of us. Thank you very much.
They kiss it because it's perfect. They kiss it because it can feed us and shelter us and even save us from climate change. In its perfect design, the Earth uses the soil to draw down carbon from the air to feed us and keep the planet healthy, even man-made carbon. But with billions of acres of soil harmed by chemicals, that process is stopped, trapping that carbon in the air and causing our climate to change. If we restore the soil, it will once again take that carbon back from the air and put it back underground, back where it belongs, back where it was meant to be.